time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Joan, as always, exceptional work from you from, your TV days all the way up to today. You're truly exceptional, and thanks for this great show you have.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Benedictine University professor Joel Ostrow joins us. Usually, we want to talk about what's going on in Ukraine. By the way, next week will be the 3rd anniversary of the war in Ukraine. But, I always tell you that Joel is an expert on Russia. And one of the things that he studied when he was learning about Russia was their constitution. And I thought it would be interesting to have him teach us a little bit about the Russian Constitution, and then that might lead to a larger discussion of what is going on with our Constitution. Joel, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much, Joan. Always good to be on with you.
I have to tell you, I didn't even really know that Russia had an official constitution. I just thought the Constitution was whatever Vladimir Putin says, that's what we do, who we are.
Well, that's what their political system is, right? So they have a constitution, and when it was first adopted, it was intended to function something like a constitution for a democracy. There's a lot of the reason I studied the Constitution so closely was because the process by which it was adopted after the violence between the Kremlin and the Russian Supreme Soviet. You might remember there was a tank fire to blow a legislature out of existence that had tried to stage a coup. Yeltsin then, literally in his own hand, crossed out some lines on the draft constitution and wrote in his own. And that was what the population voted on. That's what ultimately got adopted. And I was quite alarmed. Experts, local for the most part, were not. They sort of shrugged it off, but it paved the way for first Yeltsin to seize control, to dominate elections, to even, some may say, rig some of the elections during the 1990s, and ultimately pave the way for Putin to ignore the Constitution and install his murderous dictatorship. And that's what it is. The Constitution's, he is, since assuming this uncontested power after having all serious opposition politicians murdered, investigative reporters murdered or exiled, seizing control of all the media, he then forced essentially through executive order, changes to the Constitution that enshrine his dictatorship. But other parts of the Constitution read quite nicely. Freedom of association, freedom of expression, freedom of the press.
Before you move on, I have a question. You say Boris Yeltsin scratched out a few lines and wrote in his own. What did he get rid of, and what did he write in?
The most significant part was eliminating the checks and balances between the parliament and the president. Basically eliminated things like votes of no confidence, severely proscribing impeachment procedures, mostly related because of it was in outgrowth of the conflict between the old legislature and the executive that inspired those changes, mostly out of fear and sort of the trauma of that battle. But it did have lasting consequences that had an impact on future electoral politics and the like. The thing is, though, when Yeltsin, what those changes made and the way I wrote about them is very similar to the general situation we face here now, but for different reasons. Those changes meant that how politics were conducted in Russia depended on the personal preferences, predilections of the leader, of the president. which by definition is dictatorship. Now, Yeltsin waffled on that. I believe he genuinely hoped for Russia to grow into a thriving democracy that honored rights, but he wasn't wholeheartedly devoted to living the consequences of such a system for his own ability to rule. And then Putin, of course, had no interest in democracy.
When he crossed out these lines and wrote in what he preferred, didn't that have to be voted on? I mean, he couldn't just say, "Oh, hey, by the way, here's the Constitution. I wrote it last night." Did he have to have what we appear to have now, which is a legislative body that exists to rubber stamp whatever the leader wants?
No. In that case, it was more like the early days of our republic. Years had been spent drafting a constitution. They had a draft that was ready to go, and then that violence in the streets happened. Yeltsin then scratched in his changes, and then, according to the process that everyone had agreed to, they published that draft constitution in advance of the vote that happened 90 days later, and the population voted on it. It was a little bit of an awkward situation because the vote by most legitimate sources was not sufficient to ratify the Constitution, so they rigged that because they faced a real dilemma of having elected a parliament but not ratified the Constitution that created the parliament. Nobody really expected that to happen. There's a lot of evidence that they even rigged the adoption of the Constitution, but it was through a national ballot referendum.
Okay, so let's walk this forward. Is that Constitution still in effect? Is it still as it was written under Yeltsin, or has it been amended since?
I can answer that two ways that are going to sound diametrically opposite, but that both pertain. Yes, the Constitution still exists, heavily amended by Putin to create a strong dictatorship. No, the Constitution doesn't rule. The Kremlin rules. And the Kremlin, on a daily basis, violates the Constitution that it essentially rewrote through massive amendment. Whatever Putin wants to change, he changes. The whole situation around Navalny is a perfect example. The multiple shifting, changing charges and trials, the corruption around it, the violation of their own procedures around it, everything was controlled and orchestrated by the Kremlin. And that's just one example, but it pertains everywhere. Like I said, the assassination of opposition politicians, not just Navalny. There's a whole long stream of such assassinations. The prevention of the organization of opposition parties, the control of the media, the heavy censorship, on and on. The whole system is dictatorship.
I want to talk to you more about this. We're going to have to take a break, so let's take it now because I don't want to get started on a train of thought and have to interrupt us. I'm talking to political science professor Joel Ostrow from Benedictine University. He also co-hosts the World Discord podcast. He's an expert on Russia, and we are trying to get educated, at least I am, about the Russian Constitution, what it says, and whether or not it influences anything they do. And we'll be right back with that and more right after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
And I'm joined by political science professor Joel Ostrow from Benedictine University. He's an expert on Russia, and we are talking about the Russian Constitution that, Joel, you said Boris Yeltsin made some tweaks and that Vladimir Putin has added some tweaks. I assume they are changes that benefit his powers. Talk about the changes he made.
So, first of all, I should preface this. My expertise on the Russian Constitution came when I was explaining the rise and consolidation of Putin's dictatorship, and it was through a study of comparative constitutionalism. As a political scientist, we hear a lot about the Constitution in our country in discussions about what's happening here, either from journalists or lawyers or constitutional scholars who tend to be people with law degrees. I'm a political scientist, and I study it from a different angle. But I did have to become expert on comparative constitutions and how to read them in order to do the research I did on Russia's dictatorship. To be quite honest, I cannot talk about the details of the changes Putin has made because the fact of the matter is, under Russia's political system, they're not relevant. I can tell you that they are all aimed at authorizing executives at all levels across Russia to rule rather than to govern, to rob legislative bodies of any authority or say, and to empower the executives at all levels with the security services under their authority to carry out whatever directives those executives call for, but in a tiered system in which it's hierarchical. And ultimately what Putin says goes, below him what the governors say go, below him what the mayors say goes, and on and on. And legislative bodies at all levels are rubber stamps. There's severe limits on political competition, all the way down to criticizing, making critical comments about Russia itself. You can't criticize the Kremlin for its invasion of Ukraine. I think you're not even allowed to use the phrase invasion of Ukraine or war on Ukraine still. So really, the Constitution's not the relevant governing entity in Russia at all. And it is quite clear that is the case in the United States as well. At least it is to me. Before
we segue to the United States,
sure.
Why does, when we know that he's a dictator, when we know and he knows that he fully controls everyone and every aspect of government, everyone in government and every aspect of what they do, why does he still bother to hold elections? They're
farces. I mean, it is a source. It's a source of legitimacy, a facade of legitimacy, and enables him to use another form of propaganda to brainwash the people in his entirely censored media environment. Even North Korea holds elections, but they're not. It is disgusting what the ruler of the United States articulated the other day, demanding that Zelensky hold elections in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Vladimir Putin has held power in Russia for 26 years. Not once has he held a free and fair election. He has had at least a dozen major opposition figures murdered, shot in the back of the head, or poisoned to death. He has had murdered those who would donate to or try to finance independent political parties. He is sent to hard labor camps where they have wasted away mid-level political organizers and activists who have views different than his. He murders people outside of his country using chemical weapons and terrorist attacks. This is day after day after day. That is his rule. And for the ruler of the United States to call on a country that has been invaded and is occupied to hold elections tells you everything you need to know about him. And for his national security advisor, I think it was the national security advisor, it might have been the defense secretary, to compare the United States holding elections in the Second World War as an example for Ukraine to follow. I don't remember the Nazis occupying the United States of America until 2025.
Really? Is it possible? I want to talk more about our Constitution. Is it possible that Trump's outrageous statements that Zelensky started the war and his call for elections, because, how are we going to do these elections? We're going to ask people to gather together when that would be a great place to bomb them and kill them. Much of the population is now in other countries as refugees. Yep. How are we going to get
6
their
million
votes? And how are we going to get the votes of the people who are living in active war zones? I mean, it's absurd. It's one of those things that if you don't give it any thought, maybe it seems reasonable. But if you think about it for literally half a second, you're going to go, no, that's absolutely unworkable. I don't know if you heard, there was a Republican from Mississippi, Senator...
Mississippi, too.
Yeah, Mississippi. Senator Roger Wicker, who said on Tuesday, he was asked by, I think it was Manu Raju on CNN, about Putin, and he said Vladimir Putin should be in jail for the rest of his life, if not executed. Putin is a war criminal.
Read what that same senator said Wednesday. It was either Wednesday night or today. He has fallen in lockstep behind the Führer. Yep.
I didn't see the follow-up.
During the break, you ran a long segment. I think it was Edwin Eisendrath, right? It was. I was nodding, yes, 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 until he said that we are early in the process. We are not early in the process.
Yeah,
we
I
are
agree with you.
Far advanced down the road towards fascist dictatorship in the United States of America. And the evidence for that was the reaction of Christoph Heusgen, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, the outgoing president of the Munich Security Conference. If your listeners have not heard his speech, and really you need to watch it, his speech at the closing of the Munich Security Conference earlier in the week, you should. This is a man, a German, who knows a thing or two about fascism. And just because the American public is brainwashed by a fascist cult, the problem is you can't see that you're brainwashed by a fascist cult until the catastrophe hits. That's what fascism does. But the rest of the world can see it. And the rest of the world is terrified. And those who are brainwashed by the fascist cult think that that is great and fun and happy. But it is worth watching not only Mr. Heusgen's speech, but the reaction of the security leaders from the whole continent, the ovation they gave, the hugs they were giving to each other, and the tears shed over the demise of democracy in the United States of America and what that means for them and the rest of the world.
There is a former military intelligence officer by the name of Malcolm Nance, who's a regular guest in the mornings with Stephanie Miller. He actually, when the Ukraine war first started, went back to Ukraine to fight there for 6 months because he said, I know those people. He said, I can't sit here and do nothing. And he was on fire the other day, and he said he takes a very strong view. I agree with you. I think that we are not in the beginning of this. I think we are in the thick of it. Malcolm Nance takes the view that democracy is already gone, that the coup isn't happening. It's so much as it has happened.
Has happened.
And that people have to wake up to that. You agree?
And it is so difficult to see. It is so difficult for Americans to see. And please don't take this the wrong way. The way you were just speaking a few moments ago, we have such blind faith in our institutions because our whole system depends on our acceptance of and love for our institutions. And it is based on the assumption that those who occupy positions in our institutions of government honor them and abide by them and seek only to strengthen them. But this is the problem we have now, because the rulers, and you will note, we do not have a government, we do not have an administration. I've said before on air that there's no longer a Republican Party. I don't know what we call it, the MAGA Party, but we have a regime, not a government. And the rulers in that regime are people like Vought and the other main architects of Project 2025. They told us in black and white in about 1,000 pages exactly what they were going to do, and they're doing it. They have only hatred and disgust for our institutions. And I'm talking about separation of powers, checks and balances, judicial independence. And people are saying, this is illegal. Oh, look, the court ruled against this. So what? It means nothing. And the democracy, Joan, that we grew up in and that we knew, it's gone and it can't come back. The only question is what the future will hold. And no matter what, it's ugly. Either this trend continues for a long time, and we look more and more like the murderous type of regime that all fascist regimes are, or the people will rise up to try to reclaim our government, and then the question is, what do those with the guns do? Because it's not about law. And to me, the final signal of that was when officials in the Treasury Department and the State Department called on the security in those buildings. You know, you can't just walk into the USAID offices. You can't just walk into the Treasury Department. The officials instructed security to prevent those without authorization from entering the building and to prevent them from accessing secure servers and classified information. And the people in charge of security shrugged and let them in. The longer that goes on, the further we descend. But the problem is it's going to take those who have pledged to uphold the Constitution and the laws to side with the people rather than with the oligarchs and the fascists. And no matter how you strike it, it ends up ugly. And the other side of it, we have a different looking political society. That's
Joel, we need to
already
take a break.
Written in.
I want to keep going in this vein. Political science professor Joel Ostrow and I will be right back after a break.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Every weekday afternoon from 2 to 5 p.m. on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by political science professor Joel Ostrow from Benedictine University. We have been talking first about the Constitution as it exists in Russia and what is happening here in this country where we are experiencing a constitutional crisis, or I think more clearly put, a coup. Donald Trump is gutting government in an effort to reshape it into a form that suits him and the Heritage Foundation and Elon Musk. There was a notice just posted, Joel, supposedly the third rails of government that you never touch. The Trump administration has announced that it will kill Medicare coverage of most telehealth services on April 1st. So if you live in a rural area, if you are disabled, you are now going to have to figure out how to actually get yourself to the doctor, to the clinic, to the hospital. No more just picking up your phone and FaceTiming someone. You said something about you didn't know that we could ever recover from this. I believe that it will be a long healing process, but I still have faith that we can stop what's going on, slow it down, be annoying, fight, try to pull off midterm elections that change the balance of power, hopefully elect people into office who know exactly where their spine is and how to find it, and fight like hell. I agree with you. I think it will take a long time, but I don't think we're lost, Joel. Not yet.
I partly agree with you, but on the other side, you can't recover the norms that have been demolished. Faith in elections has been undermined. Our system elected a fascist into power and has allowed him to destroy so many of our fundamental norms and institutions in such a short amount of time that something new. I'm not saying that democracy is necessarily dead for a long time, but it has to look differently. We have to. It would require a totally different way of holding elections and a wholly different way of organizing them to allow for a third party, so that the extremist right wing can be kept in check. For example, just one example, but. Midterm elections, Joan, let's suppose the Democrats let's say they control 60% of the Senate and the House after the next elections, which is absurd to even consider. But let's just say they do. So what? What does that do? Nothing. Suppose the Supreme Court rejects every single act that Trump and Musk have imposed since January 21st. So what? None of that matters if those acts of this hypothetical Congress and this hypothetical court, if they issue them, how do they get enforced? Who's going to enforce them? And the problem with not being able to answer that question is the problem that I'm describing, that we can't go back. And going forward is going of necessity to be different. We're going to need different norms. Because now elections are warfare. How do we make elections not be warfare again? How do we restore governing towards the center? How do we restore, the truths that you and I hold to be self-evident, that all are created equal? Our current rulers, and I'm not just talking about Trump and Vance and Musk. I'm talking about the whole cabinet. And I'm talking about not even the cabinet, Stephen Miller, who's arguably the most powerful person in the country. Those guys are fascists. They don't believe that we're created equal. And the example that you just gave is proof of that. And not only do they not believe people are equal, they're happy for countless tens, hundreds of thousands, millions around the world to die. That's what they want. And that, let us be clear, the United States of America installed this regime. And you and I installed this regime. We obviously didn't do enough to prevent it. And unlike the people of South Korea who poured into the streets, we're not pouring into the streets.
Even
unlike
where was it?
Unlike all of the elected officials and government officials at that Munich Security Conference in tears. Chucky Schumer isn't in tears. Hakeem Jeffries isn't in tears. Everyone's just blindly allowing it, right? It's not just the extremists on the right that are brainwashed. We've also been numbed into whether it's terror or fear or having just given up the game. There's nothing we can do about it. I put myself in that group because when they throw everything out the window at once, they overwhelm the ability to respond, right? It's, look at this rabbit. Oh, another rabbit. Oh, there's a rabbit there. There's a rabbit there. There's a rabbit there. There's rabbits every frickin' where right now. And the problem isn't the rabbits. The problem is the regime.
I see what you're talking about, and I think I have an illustration. My neighbors told me that they were on the phone town hall with Congressman Brad Schneider, and at one point, I don't know how many people were on the call, but at one point, apparently, there's a way to do a telephone poll, and he said, what do you want to see from me going forward? Do you want me to go along with what the Republicans are doing? Do you want me to try to work in a bipartisan manner? Or do you want me to resist everything that's happening? And our neighbors voted for resistance, but they said he's immediately tallied the results, and the majority said, oh, work in a bipartisan manner. And I'm thinking to myself,
nope.
Theoretically, and maybe on paper, that looks really good, but I want to get Brad Schneider on this show and say to him, have Republicans come to you in the House of Representatives and said, oh, Brad, really, we really want you to sign on to this bill. You know, we want to move ahead in a bipartisan manner, and we think this aligns with your values. Have Republicans come to you? If there's bills that you want to move forward, are there any Republicans you can go to and say, hey, this is a great bill. How'd you like to be my co-sponsor? It is like we're holding on to something that a lot of people don't want to acknowledge is gone.
It's worse than that. What Brad Schneider doesn't recognize, what nobody in Congress recognizes, what your neighbor doesn't recognize, is Congress doesn't matter. Congress does not control the power of the purse.
It does theoretically on paper.
Well, that's the key word. Congress no longer controls the purse. Congress no longer has the power of the purse.
But that's because we've
Congress
got
no longer has oversight.
Government that's
it's not
capitulating to Trump. I don't think if Democrats were able to have a majority, I think there would be the pushback, the standing up to that we're both bemoaning is gone.
Yeah, they would pass different kinds of laws. But again, this regime is going to do what it wants to do. They don't need Congress. They obviously don't need. Congress has passed budget laws. Congress has appropriated monies that, by law, are to be spent. And the White House has decided unilaterally, we're not going to spend it. Our institutions are gone. That is a thing of the past, at least for now. Can it come back? Maybe. But the way to get it back is not going to happen in Congress. Congress doesn't exist because there is no Republican Party. If there were a Republican Party, there would have been all sorts of opposition. Trump would have been impeached already. There is no Republican Party. The gang, whatever you want to call it, the cult that uses that label is not the Republican Party. It's MAGA, and they have ceded all voice to the gang that controls the White House and the executive branch. They tell you this every day. They tell you this. They tell us this every day. It's just that nobody's paying attention to what they're saying. They're telling us every day, we don't care. Let them do what they want. Lindsey Graham's, I don't care. Let them do what they want. Trump is going to do what Trump wants, and then it'll be okay because Trump did it. That's exactly what Lindsey Graham said yesterday regarding Ukraine.
We need to take a break. I'm talking with political science professor Joel Ostrow. We will be right back after this.
This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I am talking with political science professor Joel Ostrow. I wanted to talk to him about our Constitution. You know, I think we are sometimes not very clear in the terms that we use. You know, I've heard so many politicians and activists say we're in a constitutional crisis, but I don't think the average person has a firm grasp of what that means. What would be a clearer way to convey to the average person that the country is coming apart at the seams?
January 6, 2021, that was the constitutional crisis. We're past that. I don't see a constitutional crisis because I don't see the Constitution having any force right now. It doesn't apply. It's not enforced.
And along those lines, I have a question. I know that traditionally the Supreme Court of the United States, historically, unlike the Warren Court, but historically, they have served the interests of those in power and those with money. But do you think, seeing how Trump is basically trying to not only neuter the legislative branch, but neuter the judiciary? Like, of course, they're my people. Of course, they'll rubber stamp all my ideas. At some point, do they look at each other and go, you know what, guys? This is not what we signed up for. We're not just a lapdog. We're supposed to be an equal branch of government. Do you see, I know John Roberts, sometimes Amy Coney Barrett shows flashes of independence. Do you see that happening? And what would it take to get there? Tanks in the streets?
Yeah. I mean, I could envision a world in which there were different members of the Supreme Court, and they could still have been Republican appointees, and that's, well, anyway, we can get to that among the changes that need to be made. But this regime having come to power and the court intervening and just not waiting for someone to bring a case, but stepping in and saying the executive branch is violating the Constitution, instructing the judicial branch to take action. There are FBI agents who swore oath to the Constitution, who are the security agents. They carry weapons. They have handcuffs. They can enforce the law.
To one of the
somebody needs to give the instruction, though.
Somebody on one of the cable news shows said that they worried that we would not get the resistance from the FBI because that culture is, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Whatever you say, sir. Yes, sir.
Yep.
Unlike maybe other agencies where people are allowed to be a little bit more independent. That one of the platforms, the founding platforms of the FBI is that you do what you're told. And that maybe we don't want to be looking to the FBI to save us.
You do what you're told, but it's also in enforcing the law. It's the same with the military. They swear an oath to defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. And you don't need the Secretary of Defense or even the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. The military has many tiers of command, most of whom must be horrified by the recent pronouncements of this regime.
It's interesting because the military also, there are a lot of Trump supporters in the military, and the fear was that Donald Trump would install them all in positions of power, which he may yet do. But I think Pete Hegseth saying, oh, by the way, military, plan to cut 8% out of your budget, and not just this year. I want to see an 8% cut every year for the next 4 years. I don't know.
And you know who's going to be cut. Look at what happened after the Justice Department, sort of cringe saying that, dropped the case against Adams. What was it, 9 federal U.S. and assistant U.S. attorneys resigned?
Yeah, there was like 1 or 2 every day.
I mean, that is it. And why did they resign? I think they hoped that there would be some united action. Nope. Nothing. They resigned? Okay. And now we'll replace them with people subservient to Stephen Miller. Great.
Well, what are they supposed to do? The woman
people have faith in the institutions.
Danielle Sassoon, the one who first resigned, rather than doing that, should she have held a news conference and say, they're asking me to do this, and I'm telling you right now, it's absolutely illegal. It is political. That is not what this office is supposed to be about. And then go back to her desk and wait to be fired. I mean,
call on the Supreme Court to act. Call on the Supreme Court to act. Call on the FBI to observe their oath of the Constitution. what I'm describing is something that is going to be horrific. But it's already going to be horrific. It's which horrific do we want? Those are our choices now, right? Hitler destroyed Germany's constitutional order in, what did the governor say, 53 days and some number of hours and some number of minutes. The Constitution rendered the Constitution no longer functional and rendered all political opposition powerless. Had firm control over all of the levers of power in Germany. And it wasn't until after the catastrophe that people woke up.
How did that happen? Can you give me a Cliff's Notes of how that happened in 53 days?
We're seeing it here. I hate to say it, we are seeing exactly the way it's happening here. Of a flood of decrees that demolish existing institutions, that replace and destroy pre-existing norms, not just the ones that led up to the Holocaust, but the ones that eliminated an independent legislature, that eliminated an independent judiciary. What we saw in response to the drop, to the actions around the dropping of the charges against Eric Adams, is the painted picture of the destruction of an independent judiciary. And this is a regime that thrives on, that only knows misinformation and disinformation. They accused the Biden administration, Joe Biden, the American institution defender, including of independent judiciary. If the judiciary had not been independent, the charges against Trump, the trial, Trump would have been on trial within 12 months rather than going 4 years without a trial. That's how we know the judiciary was left independent. Now it's not. Now it is controlled by the White House. We don't have an independent judiciary, but we still believe we have one. That's the problem. That is how the Nazis consolidated power in Germany. The public still thought they had the old system when they didn't. And by the time they woke up, well, at that point, it was World War II. When are we going to wake up?
Some people have said that for those who are more familiar with the history, you know, the lead up to World War I, and now that we've looked back and, you know, seen how it happened and how it could have had a few things gone differently, been avoided, and then the lead up to World War II, I'm hearing from some people who know more history than I do that we seem to be in a similar set of circumstances. Are we leading up to World War III? And will we be the good guys or the bad guys?
Right now it looks like we're part of the axis of evil.
It does, doesn't it?
That's why Christoph Huygens broke down in tears. Because the two most powerful militaries in the world are allied against democracy. That's why Europe's leaders are breaking down in tears.
But in Nazi Germany, from, again, this ragged knowledge of history that I know, it didn't seem to me that the citizens erupted in any kind of protest. Rather, they sort of went along to go along. If our citizens erupt in protest, won't that make a difference?
Well, yeah, that's why I point to how beautiful was the response in South Korea to their president's attempt to seize dictatorial power. The people didn't allow it. The elected officials didn't allow it. And he's behind bars. The South Korean people understand democracy more than we do.
And
it was what was so beautiful on Sunday.
Is also facing, from some serious jail time. Why can't we be those people? Why can't we be like those South Koreans? Maybe we'll get there.
Maybe. But you know who is there firmly are the people of Canada. I don't know if you watched that. One of the most beautiful scenes I've ever witnessed, political scenes, was the singing of the Canadian national anthem before that hockey game on Sunday. That was the people of Canada standing up for Canada, standing up for democracy, and trying to show the American people how lost we are.
I missed this. Whatever it is you're referencing, explain it to me. What happened?
So the anthem singer got through about 3 bars and just stopped because the entire crowd was roaring out the Canadian anthem. People were in tears. They were hugging each other. It sent chills up my spine, and is as I'm recalling it. It was a statement of their beloved native land, and their devotion to freedom, independence, democracy. But I think I also heard in it, or maybe I imagined it, but I don't think I imagined it, a desire for the American people to wake up and to also love those truths that we used to hold to be self-evident. Because ultimately that's what it comes down to. But we have a regime that is motivated and motivates around hate. And in the end, that is the most fundamental norm that has been violated here. And so, when members of Congress ask about bipartisanship, no, I really don't want them negotiating with people who are motivated by hate and who are motivating and fanning the flames of hate, because that's what they're doing.
Yep.
We need to oppose it, not work with it.
Yep. Joel, thank you for joining me. It is always a pleasure, and
it wasn't. This was a dark conversation.
It's always a pleasure.
That was not a pleasure.
To spend time with you.
Thank you, Joan.
We've got to find our joy where we can, and like it or not, buddy, I like you.
Damn it. You're the best, Joan. Thanks so much.
Take care. We are going to take a break for news. We'll be back with more after this.
Hey, where's Hal Sparks? I'm not sure where he is now, but I know where you can find him Saturdays at 11. He'll be right here on WCPT 820 for the Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide. You're listening to WCPT 820 because facts matter.
It's time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
I want somebody who's passionate. I want somebody who can talk to people like a real person, who can make people feel things, who can make people want to follow them.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
We are going to have another talk that mentions and maybe even revolves around the idea of tariffs. Sometimes things like that can be confusing to people, which is why I always keep this particular sound clip from the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off handy, because it shows a very defeated Ben Stein trying to explain to his class of uninvolved and ignorant teenagers exactly what a tariff is. Listen to this.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the the Great Depression, passed the a tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which raised or lowered, raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression.